Our Seattle Kraken interviews continue with Yanni Gourde. Plus, we'll give you updates on the Kansas City Mavericks and the Coachella Valley Firebirds. That's coming up on this Monday edition of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. My name is Erica L. Ayala, your host here of Locked On Kraken. Want to let you know, today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. Now, a lot of you, like myself, are very, very competitive, and and if you're competitive, then Monopoly Go is something that you can play on your phone, on the go. It is a mobile twist on the classic board game Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. All right. So listen, the off season, at least it's the off season for us. And kind of like in Monopoly, you're playing with pretend money, pretend scenarios, and all of that stuff. And we're definitely going to talk about that as we get closer to the draft and things of that nature. But before we do that, I want to continue on with the exit interviews. And not every player has gone through exit interviews. I've talked about that on a few of our previous episodes in the last week or so. But I want you to hear from Yanni Gourde. Yanni can be hit or miss on whether we get a lot of information from him or not a lot of information from him. But I put together a few clips from Yanni's exit interviews because he's one of the players that the Seattle Kraken are likely going to look to when it comes to leadership moving forward. Now, this is independent of more than likely coaching changes, any roster moves, etc. And Yanni is one of our alternate captains, but for my money, Yanni Gourde kind of plays the game in a way where I wish, even if people got a little bit of a percentage of the intensity that Yanni Gourde played with, we'd be in a pretty good situation, in my opinion. And I'll get into exactly what I think that means. But if we look at Yanni Gourde's stats and we take a look at what he's been able to do for the Seattle Kraken. He played 81 games in season one. He played, he played 81 games last season. He played 74. He was coming off of a surgery, if you remember, but he played 81 games last season. He played 80 this season, and he had 14 goals last year. He had 11 this current year. In the first season, he only played 74 games, but he had 21 goals. So I don't want us to get too bogged down in the numbers. And again, I don't focus too much on advanced analytics and mathematical equations to do some analysis. But I do think it's interesting just looking at his numbers in the first 3 seasons with the Seattle Kraken. He had his most goals in the season where he played the fewest number of games by about 6 or 7 games. He had the most assists last year. He had 34 assists last year comparative to 22 this year. He had 27 assists in season one. So last year and the year before that in points, he had 48 points overall. He was at 33 points this season. So you see that productivity, and you're going to hear from Yanni Gourde in a minute talking about offense. And I'm pretty sure I have it in this clip. He's talking about just kind of the strain that the team felt. And we can talk about this a little bit more. Yanni Gourde plus minus was minus 11 this season. It was minus 13 in season one. Yanni Gourde is one of our centerman most of the time. But his percentage at the faceoff dot was actually lower than the last 2 seasons. He was at 49.5 in the 2021-22 season. our first season. He was at 49.7 last year and at 47.8. So if you want to look at, uh, what the range is, it's not astronomically lower when it comes to his face-offs, but just something to note. His penalty minutes were at 45 in season 1, 76 last year, and 62 this year. So I like that the PIMs are going down, so to speak. You can look at other things like his productivity on special teams and stuff like that. I just wanted to go over some of these numbers, but it's a little bit tough to do in a vacuum. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of cluster these exit interviews as much as possible with who these guys played with throughout the season, because I think that gives a little bit more of a picture. So you're going to hear from Yanni Gourde today, but in the coming days, you'll hear from the guys that played alongside Yanni Gourde the most. And again, that in and of itself is a difficult exercise, just the way the season went. But without further ado, let's hear from Yanni Gourde talking about this season.
Definitely different feel this year than the first year, where the expectation are different. We had a great playoff run. We knew we were capable of. We knew we had much more to give this year than what we showed on the ice. It's a hard question. I think last year we had a response like when we needed it offensively. Everybody was feeling a little bit better about their game, their offensive ability. Everything was coming a little bit easier, and when you're feeling good things happen, or it's much easier to put the puck in the back of the net when you're feeling good. And I think this year everybody was kind of struggling offensively, and we could feel it, we could sense it. It's much harder to score goals offensively and to produce offensively when you're not feeling when it doesn't come as easy. I don't think it's about anybody else. I think it's about us and how we didn't adjust or didn't find ways to score goals. It's not about who. We played the same team we played the year before. We just had more success. It's about us and what we had in this locker room and how we felt. I don't think it's about anybody else.
So there was a little bit from Yanni Gourde, again, just talking about how this was a difficult season and saying that there is a lot that this team needs to do internally, in-house, to be able to not just get back a little bit of what made them successful last year, but more so just to kind of figure themselves out. So interesting insights there from Yanni Gourde. As I mentioned, I'm going to try and keep it so that we're speaking to line mates in succession. And so this is really interesting because some of the players that I assumed we would be talking about are actually not the ones per natural stat trick that we will be talking about. Yanni Gourde put in, as far as time on ice stats, he is the top forward with time on ice with 1133. So 1,133 minutes and 40 seconds technically of on ice time per natural stat trick. That's just on 5-on-5. At all scenarios, Yanni Gourde still up there and is still the top defender. 1395.49 is his time on ice. Only Larson, Alexiak, and Borgen are before Yanni Gourde, and he's right above Matty Beniers, another center. So that's an interesting stat in and of itself. But when you also take a look at natural stat trick, when you look at time on ice for a 3-man forward group, Yanni actually played the most time on ice, 5-on-5. obviously it's a 3-man unit, just in case that wasn't obvious. But with Ellie Tolvanen, who I would have suspected, but then also Jared McCann. So I thought that was interesting. That being said, the line switched up a lot. And also I have to talk about some biases. If you listen to the show regularly enough, you know that I like Yanni Gourde with Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen. So that being said, we're going to focus on McCann and Tolvanen in the next handful of episodes since they played with Yanni Gourde, and try to get an idea of what that cluster did. It's a little bit of a difficult activity because although they did time on ice, stats wise, spend the most time together, it wasn't consecutive. A lot of, especially we know what McCann had to do, and you'll hear from him talking about moving to that center role. So it's not a perfect science, but it's the way that we're going to organize it just to keep us on our toes. Coming up next, though, we are going to get you ready for Kansas City versus Idaho. That's right. The Kansas City Mavericks know who they're playing in round 2 after sweeping the Tulsa Oilers. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also get you ready for the Firebirds, who also know who they will be playing in round 2. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken, as I mentioned earlier on the show, today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now, we know playoffs are in gear for the NHL and the NBA, but we also know that baseball is in full swing. Either way, FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 for you in bonus bets, whether your first bet wins or loses. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs and slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by my friends at Game Time. And if I'm traveling, I am pulling up the Game Time app. I love using Game Time. When I'm in town, usually I'm in a city, not very long. I don't have a lot of downtime, but when I do, I want to find the best deals for some of the shows that I want to go see. And that's where the Game Time app comes in great. If I'm looking at baseball games, I can take a look at the view from my seat, from my section, especially when I'm going to ballparks I've never been to before. If I'm going to a concert, whether it's general admission or, a bigger concert at a newer venue and I have to figure things out, I love not only that I see my view from my seat, not only because I'm using Game Time, especially if I'm looking at last minute ticket prices, do I know I'm getting the best deal? But if for whatever chance I find a better deal, the Game Time guarantee gives me 110% of my purchase order back if I find a better price in the same section, the same row for obviously the same event on the same day. So, I think Game Time is amazing. I love using it and I want to spread the love to you. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, you can create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hey, what do you say? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. Thanks so much for those who comment on YouTube. Some comments I appreciate more than others, but hey, that's the world. I can also accept critiques. Criticisms are always interesting. Some of them, quite honestly, are entertaining. But either way, it's all about engagement, which is something that actually helps the show and do well. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you do that. We are so close to monetization. So we want to be able to continue to grow this. You know, I love going to training camp. I think it's such an important time, content wise, but also eye test wise, getting feels, getting vibes, being able to see how the Seattle Kraken and the Coachella Valley Firebirds in particular integrate. So a way to support the show is to make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. Make sure you are liking, commenting, and sharing any of our content. And hopefully you've been enjoying my conversations with Tad O'Had. And those will continue for as long as the Kansas City Firebirds are in the playoffs. But we got some news. The Kansas City Firebirds. I didn't mean to mesh them, but I meant to say the Kansas City Mavericks and the Coachella Valley Firebirds, but it still stands. We're going to talk about the Firebirds in the third segment, But right now I want to remind those of you that our Kansas City Mavericks swept Tulsa. They are the team of the city that I live in, but I wouldn't say they're my team. I'm with the Mavs. And so the 2024 Kelly Cup playoffs, it's been a little bit of a break for our Mavericks. And you heard Tad O'Had address that a little bit in our last episode, but we're going to have an extended, or I should say the second part of my conversation with Tad, not just on how to manage the time off, but also, you know, what needs to be done? What does Mavericks hockey look like? And how can they replicate that while they're not on the ice against an opponent? So we do know the opponent now for the Mavericks. They will host on Saturday and Sunday at Cable Dahmer Arena. They're going to host the Idaho Steelheads. And so Saturday's game is going to be at 7:05 p.m. That's Central Time. And Sunday's game is 4:05 Central Time. And then Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, the Mavericks will be in Ohio taking on the Steelheads. Game 5, if necessary. Game 6 and 7, if necessary, are May 14th and 15th back in Kansas City. So the Mountain Division Finals. This is obviously the divisional round, second round of the Kelly Cup playoffs in the ECHL. The breakdown when it comes to how the Mavericks have played against Idaho. Now, the last time we played them, we played a series in January. The first game was a 4-3 overtime win. And then we had another 4-3 win against the Idaho Steelheads, and then the third game 7-5. What I found interesting when looking at not the overall series, but the last game or the last series that we played either against Idaho or Allen, is that these were pretty high scoring affairs. So the next time we talk to Tad, I'm going to talk to him a little bit about that. We've talked about offense and what the Mavericks like to do, but this could be a series where the defense is critically important. And if you remember from our conversations with Tad, a part of the way that the Mavericks have been handling the defensive side, or a very specific defensive position in goaltending, is that they've been able to swap their goaltenders in and out. And they felt they could do that against the Oilers because of the Oilers not having that luxury to play multiple goaltenders. Again, I mentioned on the last episode that all of our Kansas City Mavericks goaltenders have at least 16 wins, and Tad talked about that as well. But speaking of Tad O'Had, let's get back to my conversation. This is part 2. Part 1 we had last week. This is general manager and head coach of your Kansas City Mavericks, who are your ECHL Mountain Division regular season champs and are headed to the Mountain Division Finals this weekend. And he's going to tell you how the team is going to prepare. Yeah, I mean, as I'm hearing you speak, it just sounds like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of newness with the Seattle Kraken and, as you mentioned, with the Firebirds, but it seems like that's also kind of, you know, sparked some rejuvenation. And even though it is the ever-changing hockey league, which I think is hilarious, you know, it seems like this change has been good and a positive one, and that you personally have kind of taken on that challenge.
Yeah, I would very much say so. My first couple of years, it was a tough couple of years here. And, we were dealing with a lot of different challenges. And this has definitely been a source of great pride. And it's something that I probably think one of the most grateful things, throughout hockey, one of the things you really take pride in is building, is building and growing and seeing players advance. And we're in the midst of that right now. Coachella's going into the playoffs. Heck, I think they're going to have a heck of a postseason. We're all rooting for them. We're in the playoffs. Last year, it took a lot of pride. All three organizations were in the playoffs for the first time. Seattle, for the first time in a while, Kansas City, and then, in the inaugural year for Coachella Valley. And so we want to make that a routine for all three organizations to have postseason success every year.
Yeah, I love it. As you were speaking, I was thinking of something. Excuse me, I'm outside. But I was thinking of something. How often, if at all, do you refer to, I wouldn't say maybe around this time of year, but or maybe just in general, are you able to, or do you find it useful to have the guys kind of walk through some of those AHL games or NHL games, as a team or as maybe a decor or a forward group? Is that something that you're able to do or that you find useful?
Oh, it's amazing. These guys as a whole, they watch a ton of hockey. Like even the other day, we had a day off. I wanted them to decompress, kind of get away from the rink. And, when I was talking with them, hey, what'd you guys do, yesterday? Almost all of them were like, we watched playoff hockey. So, the conversations in the trainer's room, in the coach's room, just around the locker room, it's constantly about, what's going on in the NHL, the playoffs, or, what's coming about with the AHL. And so we utilize some of the clips for sure. And we'll talk about different things that are going on in the playoffs that are, common threads with us, maybe how goals are being scored or the way series can swing and so forth. Like, I think we're constantly always using that as a learning experience. As far as walking through clips, we will, to a certain degree, more on like a special teams or on a structure component, maybe a forecheck or something.
Yeah.
But I would say that's maybe 20%, probably 80% is, just your own clips and stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm always curious. Some people love film, some people absolutely hate it. So.
It's really it's one of those things where it's paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
At times, you have to be careful. We have a goal here. We try to keep all of our meetings under 7 minutes. And then when it comes to video, we would try to keep that under 4 minutes. And just saying that, you might say, oh, that doesn't seem like a lot. Well, really, we'll go from, after a game, 180 clips down to 50 clips, down to 20 clips, and then we try to maybe boil it down to 8 or 9. And
wow.
So we don't want to give the guys too much. They do too much thinking. We would rather them be instinctual. And so we constantly want to just boil it down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Coach, as always, I'm always learning something when we chat. So I think that'll be good for us wrapping up the first series, and I'm sure we'll connect again a little bit closer to game one of the second round.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. All right, thanks again, Zach.
Thanks very much.
All right, take care. Always good stuff with Tad. I mentioned it on the last episode, but I didn't realize that he's a Washington native, which is really cool. And so you've heard him in the last 2 episodes that we've had Tad featured. He has a very deep respect for what he's been seeing and experiencing through the Seattle Kraken pipeline. And a part of that, I now know, is because he's a Washington native. And so he's seen the, as you heard him say, kind of the landscape, the climate, the culture of hockey in his home state, Washington State. change over time. And now to be directly a part of that growth pattern, I think it's kind of cool. You also heard Tad and I talk about film sessions, like how much film is too much. I really liked his insights there. So I get the gist that this is a Mavericks team that they want to be doing a lot of explosive, high intensity activity when they are on the ice. And then if they don't need that, or it's not required for them to do that, anything else that they'll be doing is to get the guys away from the ice, off of their feet. But also Tad knows that they do need to have those legs game ready come this weekend. So it's a really interesting balancing act. And I think that's something, again, that we saw from the from the Coachella Valley Firebirds last year. And I think also from the Seattle Kraken last year, that balance maybe wasn't in check. I really like talking about practice when it comes to the Seattle Kraken. But I know it's a grueling season. It's tough, and that recovery is really important. So as always, I appreciated Tad giving us a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain, at least for the Kansas City Mavericks. But it sounds like there is a lot of synergy throughout. So other things that we're going to do as we continue to have relationships with the Mavericks, the Firebirds, and of course the Seattle Kraken is start pulling out things that are similar and things that are different. What is kind of quote unquote company standard for the Seattle Kraken organization? But coming up next, as we close out this Monday episode of Locked On Kraken, let's talk about the Coachella Valley Firebirds, who have also been away from the ice, as in not playing games, because they had a first round bye. And they now know their opponent in round 2 and will get you that schedule. We did show the schedule at the back end, and I talked through it, but just a reminder, for the Kelly Cup playoffs, the first game against Idaho is at Kansas City, Saturday, May 4th at 7:05 p.m. Game 2 at Kansas City, Sunday, May 5th at 4:05 p.m. Those are local start times. I'll get you ready for your AHL playoffs coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. All right. Today's episode, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is brought to you in part by Monopoly Go. Now, let's take a moment to talk about Monopoly Go. You might have picked up from listening to the show or watching the show, I'm a pretty competitive person. I mean, I had that whole intense bold prediction about the Vegas Golden Knights. Anyway, I know it seems like forever ago, but if you're also competitive, why not find a kind of healthy and fun outlet to get some of those competitive juices flowing? And that's through Monopoly Go. You can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together, or you can even be a little bit more sneaky and kind of loot their money, charge them whatever you want for rents and whatnot. But there's so many other things that you can do on the mobile app that maybe you're not involved in the board game that you have. Like I have the Zelda version, but unless you have every single version under the sun, you're limited to whatever the pieces are. But on the mobile app, there are cool new playing pieces. So many different travel boards. You can actually play multiple games at a time. And again, you can heist your friend's vault, which if you tried doing that playing the board game, I mean, I don't know about you, but the way some of my folks get down, it might be a impassioned conversation. Monopoly Go feels like a new and exciting game every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. And so it's just, again, a nice, great mobile and innovative spin on a classic. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. And I guess good luck. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Kraken, we're going to talk about your Coachella Valley Firebirds, and they are headed to the playoffs now. We talked about the Kansas City Mavericks. They start round 2 on Saturday, but you don't have to wait until Saturday night for hockey. Well, also there's NHL hockey, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But if you want Kraken affiliate hockey, We get it on Friday, May 3rd, as the Coachella Valley Firebirds are actually at the Calgary Wranglers. Game 1 and 2, they'll play on the road, and then host games 3, 4, and 5. And of course, we're going to keep up with everything happening with our Coachella Valley Firebirds. But it's been a good season. We ended with a win against the what is it, San Diego Gulls, right? And so, but we've seen this team have to battle through adversity a time or two. But I think the team is liking where they're at. Just not how the team wanted to start the season. And we talked about that earlier, because it was interesting to see that the Coachella Valley Firebirds and the Seattle Kraken kind of stumbled out of the gate. But, Troy Bodie, who you've heard Tato had talk about, he says, don't worry about that. Quote, you don't care too much how you start. You care about how you finish, how you play your last game. Bodie, who is the vice president of hockey operations, said after the clinching win, the Pacific Division clinching win. I think we're playing our best hockey right now going into the playoffs, which is really great, and really what you strive for, is what he says. So, how you finish. And it's the finish that has been difficult if we look, especially with the Firebirds and the Kraken. I talked to Tad about that a little bit with the Mavericks, a little bit of a different scenario and situation, but even at times, closing out games, closing out series, closing out an entire season has been difficult, even as we're meeting unprecedented success. And for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, they got to the finals in their first season. Now we're going to have a conversation, and we might bring Jason JD Hernandez, the voice of the Firebirds, in for this one when it's time. But, we've had that kind of failure. I'm using air quotes if you're not watching on video. We've had that failure conversation. I had it weeks ago, a month or so ago, and we're going to have it throughout the off season. We don't know what quote unquote failure of a season will look like yet for the Firebirds, but I think I've liked how the Firebirds specifically have been able to handle the ups and downs of the season. And I agree with Bodie that they're playing some of their best hockey right now. I think we're stronger down the middle this year. He mentions Podorowski, Devin Shore, both of whom got a little bit of time with the Seattle Kraken. And of course, he says we've got one of the top NHL prospects in Shane Wright. So I think our middle is very deep, which I love hearing also, because what did we hear in season 1 and even right before season 1? Drafting Matty Beniers and Shane Wright was very intentional by the Seattle Kraken to get that middle secured. And it won't be, well, actually, I have to see how it pans out. We might get to Matty Beniers this week. I have another engagement towards the end of the week. So if we don't get to Matty this week, we'll get to him at the top of next week, because again, he kind of played with McCann. So anyway, the point is we're the Matty Beniers episode. Like, I have so many notes. On Matty Beniers, because I feel like the way his season is being evaluated, even if we use that kind of like failure model, is very interesting to me. Anyway, back to the Coachella Valley Firebirds. We saw what the Firebirds was able to do, and their run last year was able to do for Joey Decord. Now, a different situation this year, and Bodie talks about it. We had a great goalie in Joey last year, but Chris Drieger is just as good. And when Drieger goes out and Stetska comes in, he pretty much does the same thing and stops a bunch of pucks. So we see also at this, at the lower levels, right, our affiliate levels, getting that 1-2 punch when it comes to goaltending is critically important. So the Firebirds are looking for a deep run again. We're hoping to have someone from the coaching staff that we can talk to this week. So, we'll get back to you on that. But just to put into context, again, this team did not start off well. We talked about that way early in the season. 257 goals last year in the regular season. They fell just shy of that, actually. And they took the division, the Pacific Division. Total record was 46-15 with 6 OT losses, 5 shootout losses, 103 points overall, goals for at 252. So not far off offensively. They gave up 182 goals. We're going to have more because, again, the Coachella Valley Firebirds, they start round 2 on Friday. The Kansas City Mavericks, they start round 2 on Saturday. But either way, we will have more for you here on Locked On Kraken. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. Let's go, Kraken. Let's get fired up. Go Kansas City as well. All of the things. I'll catch you on the next episode of Locked On Kraken. Erica L. Ayala signing out. Peace out.